Good morning, welcome to Headline Focus here live on Core Politics with me, Rob Double. It is Wednesday the 6th of June 2018. Let's have a look at what's making the news today. And to start off with, it's a story, but to be honest, it's a bit of a non-story as well. Labour, as you can see, are fudging a soft Brexit, or rather have moved position towards a far softer Brexit position. Now, I think this is something over nothing, and I'll tell you why now. So Brexit Secretary, or Shadow Brexit Secretary, Keir Starmer, has convinced the party leadership to back a new amendment, or new change, demanding full access to the EU single market. So Labour's new Brexit position is that it's pushing for full access to the single market. Now, this is different from continued membership of the single market, or at least the continued membership of the European Economic Area, the EEA. So there's a slight difference between them, but it's still wanting to stay as close as possible to the single market and maintain as much of the single market access as possible. Now, this was approved by the Shadow Cabinet yesterday, and however, what needs to be said is that Remain MPs, particularly Remain MPs who've been pushing for an EEA, more single market customs union membership, Brexit deal, have actually been angered by this, because what the Labour leadership have done is that they've pushed for this full access policy, but what they haven't done is they haven't backed a House of Lords amendment, which is calling for Britain to remain in the actual European Economic Area in what's called that Norway-style agreement. So what the Labour Party have done is they've not gone for the amendment from the House of Lords saying we want, as our policy, to stay in the European Economic Area, to stay in the single market membership. They're actually saying we're going to do our own route. We're not going to go down the House of Lords route. We're going to do our own amendment, doing full access to the single market. A slightly watered down, more vague, more subjective term, which is why fundamentally this is another fudge of the Labour Brexit position. It's full access, but what does full access mean? No one really knows. And why they've done this is very simple. It's because in terms of single market access, if you were to promise you wanted to remain in the European Economic Area, if you wanted to remain part of the single market post-Brexit, you would have to commit the Labour Party to accepting the principle of the four freedoms, because the European Union has made it clear that single market access must have including into it accepting all the rules, accepting all the regulations of the single market, which includes freedom of movement and the four freedoms of the EU. The freedom of movement would, of course, for the Labour Party, pose a significant concern, because a lot of their voters, a lot of Labour sympathetic voters, had concerns over freedom of movement in the Brexit vote themselves. And just remember as well that there were a number of key Labour constituencies which voted heavily for leave, as well as a number who voted heavily for remain. So what Keir Starmer's done here is that he's created a vague enough policy surrounding the single market, which is going to keep the Remain side, or rather Remain Labour supporters, happy enough, because it sounds like the Labour Party wants to stay in the single market, but also ensuring that for the Brexit voting side of the Labour supporters, that they're not going to feel that Labour have abandoned Brexit, or rather have pushed for a continuation of freedom of movement. So really interesting point there. Not a lot of noise has been made about it today, but you should keep that in mind in terms of the caveats, or rather the context of what actually the announcement is saying. Next up though, HMRC, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, have said that they're going to be losing billions on Brexit. At least that's the story from the Times today. Billions of pounds will be lost to the Exchequer as a result of delays to key HMRC projects which have been caused by Brexit. Basically, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs have got too much on their plate to be pursuing other projects which had been in the pipeline for the past few years. Now, there are apparently 39 items on a list of HMRC Transformation Portfolio list of stopped or paused projects, which has been published. Now, the biggest of this, and this is where the big revenue loss and the billions of pounds headline comes from, is what's to do with making tax digital. So HMRC have been pushing since George Osborne's time, and indeed Philip Hammond adopted this as well, pushing for making tax systems digital. People are able to access and submit and do all of their tax through digital platforms rather than having to do it by paper and on the phone and stuff like that. It was predicted by HMRC to contribute more than £1 billion to the Exchequer by 2022. All of this stuff, or at least a large portion of it, has been put on ice as HMRC deals with the changes, structural and indeed, in terms of everyday life changes, which Brexit is going to bring. And as a result, the headline of losing billions comes from that. Expect for some pro-Brexit supporting MPs to be saying this is Project Fear 2.0, but at least that is making the news as well today. And finally, Theresa May is meeting the Norwegian Prime Minister today, Erna Solberg. She's going to be in town in London discussing Brexit with Theresa May. Now, the key thing here is that all indications are she's going to be bringing a direct message for British politicians, which is the same as what I said earlier. The EEA membership, aka access to the single market, something that Norway has adopted, the Norway model of the European Union relationship, must include submitting to all the rules and regulations and continuing to accepting all the rules over freedom of movement, all the four freedoms, as an absolute. There is no movement on that for Britain in a Brexit relationship. Now, in terms of timing, that's significant because of the announcement that the Labour Party have just brought out. But expect potentially some more lines from this as Theresa May, the Prime Minister, and Erna Solberg, the Norwegian Prime Minister, due to be meeting this afternoon over in Downing Street. That's pretty much it for today. You're up to date. Don't forget you can find all the latest on what we're doing here on Core Politics on our Facebook page and Twitter just right here. But from me and all the team here at Core London, have a fantastic start to your Wednesday.